Listeners, viewers, welcome to another episode of Blighty Talks Bricks. My guest today is somebody that I don't actually know. We've only spoken a couple of times on the telephone. One of the things that I found out from this lady is that she's a big rugby fan. And I'm feeling incredibly uncomfortable because the regular viewers and listeners will know that I'm a big Harlequins fan. And I'm actually sitting here in a Saracens top, so I'm feeling a bit itchy, but I'm sure we'll get through it. This lady that we've got today is someone that's been in the industry for a period of time, has had a number of roles, one of those roles being managing director. She's now set up her own consultancy, and I'm really looking forward to the chat we're going to have. So without further ado, Katy, welcome to Blighty Talks Bricks.
Thank you.
How are you?
Well, I'm fine, and I hope you are wearing the Saracen shirt. I do appreciate it.
Well, I'm struggling a bit.
I'm sure you are.
I'm struggling a bit.
Especially after last weekend.
Well, I knew you was going to mention that. I couldn't believe the result when I looked at it. It was like, you are joking. And obviously they play at Tottenham. Makes it even worse. I'm certainly not going to get any Tottenham guests on because I know what happens then. I'm definitely in trouble then. But so you're well?
I am, thank you. Yeah, I'm well.
One of the questions I like to ask the guests when they come on is how you got into the industry.
So I always wanted a career in construction, but I never thought of a planned career in house building. So my dad was a quantity surveyor, is a quantity surveyor, retired. And my uncle is a quantity surveyor, now long retired. So quantity surveying, construction has always been part of my life. And so from the age of about 12 or 13, I always knew about and wanted to
from
be a quantity
early on, you
surveyor.
actually pinned, you was going to go down that route.
Yeah. Not encouraged actually by my father.
Was you not?
No, but something that I always wanted to do. And so, did A-levels and a degree in quantity surveying and had no intention actually of entering house building at all. In fact, I didn't really know that it was a sector.
Right.
I saw construction as large-scale office blocks, schools, large projects that my father worked on. And but I graduated in the early 90s. I graduated in 1994. So we're just about coming out of the recession, but it was really tough.
Yeah.
I struggled to get work. My father actually owned, at the time, he's now retired, but my father actually owned a PQS practice, a private quantity surveying practice. And I'd always imagined I'd go into PQSing.
Right.
But not believing in nepotism, he didn't give me a job. But in the early 90s, before I graduated, I'd actually met Graham Cherry.
Right.
And the one thing my father always taught me was the value of relationships.
Yeah.
And whilst never paid for any work I ever did for my dad, growing up, I used to shadow him quite a lot and do work experience in his office. And his company, Stace, which is still going now, used to do the QSing and project management for Countryside Commercial.
Right.
And Graham ran Countryside Commercial. So during my university years, one day when I was shadowing my dad, he'd had a meeting with Graham, and a couple of years later, he was having another meeting, and Graham happened to say to him, well, what's your daughter doing now? And I think Dad said, well, she's about to graduate. And he said, well, get her to send in her CV. Don't know if you've got anything, but I'll just punt it out to the regions.
Yep.
And that was at a time when, I don't know if you remember, but Copthorne Homes.
Yes, I used to deal with them.
Okay, was being launched.
Trevor.
Trevor Selwyn.
That's it.
Yeah. And Copthorne Homes was quite a new brand.
Yeah.
It was established coming out of the recession. Countryside were very known for their very large executive style housing. Copthorne Homes filled a gap in the market for first time buyers and smaller housing. And they were looking for an estimator, a graduate estimator.
So that's where you started?
So that's where I started, 1994, Countryside Properties, Copthorne Homes, working for David Everett.
Didn't know that name.
Yeah, he was the commercial manager there at the time. Sorry, commercial director there at the time. Yeah.
And so that started your journey in house building by default, effectively?
Completely by default, and I've never left.
And just fell in love with it?
Yeah, and well, it's fairly unique. I mean, I've not had experience of other industries, but I think anyone you speak to in house building, what they love the most is the people.
There's lots of lovely people in the industry.
Yeah, lots of characters.
Yep, for sure.
But also lots of lovely people. Lots of very kind people.
So how long was you at Countryside for?
Over 11 years. Yeah, so I started off as a graduate estimator, and I always say I grew up at Countryside. Yep. It was a fantastic education in the industry. Not only just the way they dealt with placemaking and approached placemaking, but how they went about things internally, the processes, the procedures, the accuracy, the getting it right. And I mean, it was hard.
Yeah.
It was, and working for David Everett was hard.
Was it David you worked for all of that time?
For a lot of it. But what an inspiration. And he was resolute with how he wanted things done, and hugely successful as a result of that. Yeah. And he stayed at Countryside for many, many years, and actually only retired about 2 years ago, I think. Yeah. But I worked in the estimating department for a while, and what I think is fantastic about the Countryside or other large companies, or when you have somebody and you catch their attention, is that gives you a clear path to being promoted. And so I did a long stint in pre-contract estimating. I then moved over to the land team and advised on the technical and financial due diligence of buying land. Got a lot of exposure to kind of regional board level in presenting exchange packs and completion packs. And then I went from there to the development team and became a development manager. And that's really where I cut my teeth on the cradle to grave part of development management. And I rose really quickly through the ranks and was development surveying director for the London and Thames Gateway region. Right, yeah. So by then Copthorne as a brand was no more, and then it was regionalised. And so that gave me exposure to not only managing a team of development managers, but sitting on a board, regional board, and also just having that sort of MD-ship experience of understanding and being responsible for the financial performance of many projects. And so you rose up through the ranks. You've got a really good grounding and a good understanding. Yeah. Why did you leave Countryside? Well, I was there for nearly 12 years, and in 2005 it was being bought back. So it went from a PLC to a privately owned business. Yeah. And I think I wasn't unhappy there at all. But Trevor Selwyn, who we'd already mentioned, had a few years earlier gone to a start-up business and had been speaking to me for some time about going to join him. And my MD above me as a director was in his early 40s. I don't think he was going to go anywhere. Right, so there was the career path had sort of come to a line. I just think I think it was time. I think I was at that point where I thought I could either stay here forever, or try something new. And so I went to the startup, and that was really my journey and introduction to the SMEs. Yeah. Very different, isn't it? Completely different. Yeah, very different. Really different. But working in that, not only just for a startup, and then what that led on to in terms of working with other SMEs, is that it gave me a really deeply held just admiration for business owners and what they go through and the personal risk that they take.
Yeah.
And running an SME house builder is entirely different to being in a PLC or a major that's really well capitalised, really well funded. Well, funding you just don't think about.
Yeah, and
you don't have to think about it.
Come on the agenda,
it's entirely different, and it has a whole new set of challenges. You know, working in a major has its challenges, but running an SME is like nothing else.
I've found over the years the people that they're the big PLCs, it really suits them, and they don't want to be in the smaller situation, and vice versa.
I love and loved as an MD and relished the responsibility of being the apex decision maker and growing a business. And of course you can look back and think how stressful some of those times were, but I loved it. I really enjoy the challenges and trying to solve the problems that SMEs have, which is kind of led me to doing what I do now.
To what you're doing now. And how is the new business going?
Yeah, very well. It's going well. Yeah, it's
what you expected?
Well, it's certainly what I wanted to do. I'd been an MD of Story Homes for 8 years.
Was it as long as that? Was it? Wow.
And I took that business from doing 6 units a year to 100, from a turnover of 2 million to over 25 million, delivered profit year on year. I was really, really proud of what I'd achieved there, but I felt I'd taken the business to where it could go. I did that without any external investment, so I'd ploughed the profits back into the business and really worked hard to create a brand that could sit alongside, you know, some of the PLCs. You know, we were on consortium sites building, and our flags were flying, you know, adjacent to the PLCs. What a proud moment. Yeah. But I'd got to the stage where I felt I couldn't take it any further, and the business owners were at the stage where their risk appetite had changed. Yeah. They had other business ventures. In fact, they actually didn't have a great deal of experience at all in construction or development. Right. And I think it's tough. I think this industry is tough for investors or people outside of it to truly understand just the length of time everything takes and the difficulties and the uncertainty and the risk.
For sure.
And so when you've got investors that have other businesses that are nothing to do with construction, and the risk profile of those businesses is so different, and it's such a quick turnaround. They're cash cows. Yeah. House building isn't.
No.
House building isn't like
and
that.
It's slower now than it's ever
So
been.
slow and so risky.
Yeah, I think it's certainly dangerous times.
Yeah.
One of the other questions I'd like to ask you is, being a female, I've always worked with females, particularly on the sales side of our business, which is predominantly female. Did you find that you had objections on your career path? Was it? Do you feel that people blocked you because you was female? Did you feel that you had to work, in your mind, twice as hard than maybe if you was called Kevin?
I think that's always such a difficult question to answer when I haven't had a different experience. But I would say that when I was at Countryside, I think before I could see it in myself, certainly men in positions of power that were there saw something in me that they wanted to nurture in terms of my career growth. Because, I mean, it's a win-win, isn't it? Ultimately, you know, I was good for those companies, but I think I couldn't see it in myself at first. And so I don't have any complaints about the opportunities I was given. I've always had male bosses, even investors, even at Story Homes, you know, the two brothers that own that, you know, they're guys. I probably went through a competitive process to get the job as MD, I don't know. Yeah. But they offered me a job when I hadn't had an MD-ship. And so I've always been, I think, wanting the next thing. And I think I've expressed a hunger to take on more. But it was interesting. On Tuesday evening, I was at an event, and a Women in Property event. Right. And there was lots of chit-chat about the industry and, of course, how diversity is important and how we should be encouraging diversity. But I made the point, and I think this is a really important point to make, in that I've been working in this, this is my 30th year working full-time in the industry, and I've been around construction my entire life. And before I graduated and got a job in 1994, I think right up until that point, you go to any site office or any professional office related to construction, and very often there would be a calendar with a topless woman on it. Yep. You wouldn't get invited to events because the men wanted to have an all-male environment, to have whatever experience they wanted to have, you know. And so I reminded everybody there the other night, we have come a long way, and rightly so. Yeah, rightly absolutely. So, as have many, many other industries. And I think what will be really interesting is the next 20 years for the industry to see how, young men coming through the industry who have had a very, very different upbringing and education to certainly people in my age group and potentially yours, do create opportunities and a more diverse environment. My daughters would be horrified to go into a workplace, they don't work in construction, but to go into their workplace and see pictures of naked women on the wall.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It was commonplace.
Yeah, and so the industry has shifted, and I think it's very easy to get drawn into the negativity of the lack of diversity, but there are more opportunities now than I think there ever have been. And it still relies on often men in positions of power to promote women. And in my experience, that has always happened.
It's interesting. I mean, as I said, when I started in this industry, I came across a female managing director. I worked predominantly with, I've never seen it, but I come from the East End. So cultural values of mine are diverse anyway. And it really is, it's just about what the work ethic is. And one of my questions, where do you get this ambition, this energy, and this strength of character, which you've obviously got, comes across in bundles just talking to you? Where did that come from for you? Because it's not everyone has that.
No. Well, I suppose I'm lucky that I probably got a gene along the way. I mean, my father's an entrepreneur. He owned a quantity surveying practice. And in fact, I was at another event recently, and I bumped into 3 people that work for Stace. Right. And they're a 200-strong QS firm now. My dad started it in 1968. Incredible. He had incredible drive and ambition. But my mum had her own career as well. And
what did Mum do?
She had a career in education. Oh. She was a head teacher, and my parents still brought up 3 children, and my dad helped clean the house, and
just mucked in and got on with it.
Yeah, and I don't know. I've from the moment I thought about work, I was ambitious. And
at 12, 13, you knew where you wanted to go.
Yeah. And
I'm 60 this weekend, I still ain't got a clue what I want to do.
Well, I think that's the hard bit. I think, as you go through your life, of course, your life changes so much as well. Yeah. At first you have all of that naive and innocent energy. And, I think, that propels you through the first perhaps 10 years of your career. And then, of course, very often your home circumstances change, or you have children, or you have other things that I think can distract you from work a little bit, or can temper your ambition. And that's okay, because life isn't all about work.
No, it's not, and it's not always about good things. My next question for you would be: how do you cope with your emotional wellness? Because you're obviously very strong, you're obviously very ambitious. If I take my experiences, there are some lows that come with that. How do you deal with those kind of things? I tried to ask them when I have my guests on, whether they're in property or not, to try and find out what mechanisms they use to, as I call it, keep themselves on the straight and narrow.
I think I'm really fortunate that naturally I have very robust mental health.
Yeah.
But that isn't the case for everybody. I have personal experiences of members of my family that don't. For me, I think it was really only when COVID hit that I really struggled with work and the pressures of trying to run a business during those COVID years. But for me, I've always turned to sport. I love swimming. I took up yoga about 5 years ago, which is very different to kind of other sports that I'd done. Yep. I've recently taken up Pilates. I love walking. I go outdoors a lot. But I also have a really, really supportive husband. He works in the construction industry, not in house building.
Right.
And, I think he understands a lot of the pressures.
The highs and the lows that go with it.
Yeah, the highs and the lows. But it's really, really important that you have an outlet for it, because it can be crippling for people. And I totally understand that from the experiences that I've had with members of my family.
Certainly with this podcast, the one thing that has shocked me is the amount of people that are struggling. Yeah. I struggle a bit. And they've reached out and, to talk about their stories. That's been a shock.
Yeah.
Because you always think you're on your own. Whether you're robust or not, you always think you're on your own. But I think if you've got problems, it's just knowing that you've got a challenge. Yeah. Once you know you've got a challenge, you can deal with it. Yeah. It's accepting that first. Yeah. Talking about challenges, one of the questions I'd like to ask is, do you think we as an industry, house building, look after ourselves properly in terms of the way we portray ourselves to the general public?
I think one of the big issues that's been created or occurred, if you like, over the last 20 years, 10 years, 20 years, is the vitriol that is surrounding house building.
Absolutely.
Now, you can be at a planning committee meeting and people that are speaking against a development, if the decision goes in their favour, they'll be clapping and whooping and everything's about a petition. And from a developer's point of view, when you do get planning permission, you feel like you've won a victory. Yeah. And I mean, the planning system is part and parcel of creating that issue. Yeah. And the politicisation of house building. And I think house builders are not esteemed as an industry, and it's almost like we're the enemy.
Yeah, for sure.
But if we don't build houses, nobody else will. No,
but you're absolutely right in everything you're saying. I just think that we as an industry don't stick together. It's the one thing that started this journey with the podcast was actually to try and get the industry to start promoting the good that it does, the amount of money that it brings in for the Chancellor. Mental well-being has got to come. It's got to stem from people being safe and living with a roof over their head. That's going to help. Yeah. And we have got so many problems. Moving on, we're in a recession, for sure. That's something the government have finally acknowledged. We have a housing crisis. I talk about Blighty Talks Bricks having a magic wand. I'm going to give you the magic wand, and if there was 3 things you could do for the industry to help it move along, what would you say? Right, they're the 3 things I want to get into play.
I would reintroduce top-down housing targets. I would create a stimulus package to help first-time buyers buy their first home. And I would make the industry aspirational for people to want to go into.
And where would that be? At school level?
I think it's got to be.
Yeah.
It's got to be. And, you know, we all know that with each recession or downturn in the market, people leave the industry. Yeah. And very, very often they don't come back into it.
No, for sure.
And so that pool of people that we're all wanting to recruit and that talent pool gets diminished. And we all want more diversity. We all want good people. We all want talent. And I think it's got to be seen as an aspirational industry, and I don't think it is.
Is that because work from home is prevalent in society today? I'm totally against it. Would you think that it's considered hard work? Do I want to be out on a building site? Do I want that in situation? Because if you're going to come into the industry, you arguably have got to be in an office environment or on site. Yeah. Is that something people, because they want to sit behind a laptop or a computer now? I think
I always see house building actually as, whilst we're all one sector, being on site is different to being office based and going to site. Yep. There is no doubt about it. Working on site is hard work. It's very hard work. But it can also have very high rewards.
For sure.
To it. To your point about working from home, I mean, this is just my view. Development is a team sport. There are 5 or 6 disciplines that all must come together for housing developments to be successful. And the optimum way of creating that success is to all be together as much as possible, in my view. Yeah. And I honestly don't know how you, particularly as an SME perhaps, or even larger companies, create that growth strategy and maintain success, which is ultimately profit, when you're not able to all be together all the time.
It's a training thing as well, isn't it? I mean, you said about going back when you was younger, going and shadowing your dad. Yeah. You know, it's just the way that you see people just behave in the office or in meetings or in a negotiation or actually when they've got a problem.
Absolutely.
I always say to the people in my business is, if you've got a problem, put your hand up and then we can deal with it. But if you're not there, how do you do that? Well,
and it's a number of things. I mean, you mentioned negotiation. I think, being in an office environment and in that team environment, I learned diplomacy. I learned man management skills. I learned, yes, to put my hand up if I was struggling, but also you want people to get on as well. If someone's doing well, how do I know if they're doing well if they're at home?
You don't.
And you know what it's like when you're in an office. You might have an outturn piece of work. In my case, it might be a bill of quantities or something like that, or an estimate, build estimate, or a budget. But whilst I'm producing that in an office, I'm also got my ears open. I've got my eyes open. People are coming and talking to me. I'm helping with other things. I'm bringing people along. But the one thing being in an office environment also taught me was where to find my leading edge in terms of getting noticed, putting myself forward, understanding what all those people above me wanted from the people that they wanted to bring on and promote. And that's what concerns me about people that are at home, that where do you learn that sharp elbows, that pick me
And I think you're right, and I think it's we have a challenge with getting people into the industry. You're also right when you say we have a recession, we lose people and lots of them don't come back. You've mentioned targets, you've mentioned getting the sort of the staff side of the industry sorted out. What's your final wish? What's one thing that you can bring in play tomorrow to make life better for what we're in the crisis we're against?
Well, I think if the government could do something on stamp duty and stimulate the market that way, I think that would be, that's something that's going to work.
I found it really difficult to get my head around this current Conservative government, particularly it being a Conservative government, that there's been no mention, in my view, of the housing crisis, the industry and what it can do. It's just as though it's like a blind spot for them.
Well, at the Conservative Party conference, Rishi Sunak did not mention house building once.
Not once.
Not once. Yet they're the party of house building, and it's not the case.
Is it because it's quite interesting? I had a guy called Sean Ellis on, who's managing director and a shareholder in his own little development business that he's going to grow. And he made the point about MPs want votes, and it's the Conservative side of life that doesn't want any more property. So we as an industry don't have a vote, but you and I have a vote. But the Conservative Party, the people that are voting Conservative, don't want any more property.
It's a hard one, isn't it? I mean, Theresa Villiers is my local MP, and when she came knocking on doors a few weeks ago, and I wanted a conversation with her
knocking on your door,
about
didn't she?
top-down targets, she didn't want to talk about it.
Where do they think, lucky for me, we're living longer, where do they think we're going to live? The older we're getting more and more people in this country, for lots of reasons why. But surely they just can't ignore it.
And like, as I said before, if we don't build houses, no one else will. And the number of SMEs is depleting.
Very
the
much
number
so.
of major house builders are also getting fewer. They might be getting larger, but they're getting fewer. And, we need more housing.
Well, it was also Peter Truscott, who was on the podcast a few weeks back. He made a really good point. He said, we don't make people.
Yeah.
They're here.
Yeah.
The 70 million people and growing, they're here. We don't make people. Yeah, it just seems to be a blind spot at the moment for us, doesn't it?
And housing, we know, is so important to people's well-being, to educational attainment, to work, to social mobility.
Well, we're also an industry. I mean, we give so much back in so many ways that if we don't have house building, we haven't got anywhere to live. But there's so much that's coming back by the way of schools, grants, recreational facilities. It's terrible. On charities, do you have a particular charity that's close to your heart?
I do. Blood cancer charities are pretty close to my heart, and particular lymphoma action.
Right. For what reason did you get close to them?
In 2007, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Right, okay.
And so I went through operation to remove some tumours and some aggressive chemotherapy, and very happy to say came out the other side of that.
You're on the good side of that.
I am.
Fantastic.
But they were incredible. And you talk about mental well-being. I'd never suffered at all from mental health issues. But I remember being on my treatment, and actually it was pretty grueling anyway, but one of the side effects from one of the chemotherapy drugs I was on caused depression.
Did it really? Did they tell you that would be one of the side effects?
Yes. And I'd never, ever suffered from depression, ever before. And the physicality of being depressed is very real.
Yeah.
And it affects your ability, in my case, it affected my ability to think, to make decisions, it kind of affected all my senses. And Lymphoma Action have a helpline that you can ring for anything to do with lymphoma, but they have trained people that can just help you through those moments. And what an incredible gift.
And now that treatment stopped, the side effect went?
It went immediately after I stopped the treatment, yeah.
It's interesting when I've had people, as I said earlier, about people reaching out. One of the things that lots of people say to me is that energy bit, you know, that just the thought of putting one foot in front of the other, and decision making. You know, get people that are particularly decisive people become indecisive, to start second. Do I want to do that? Should I do this, that? But you're all on the mend now.
I'm completely
fully
on
repaired.
the mend. I have been for many years, and yes, thank goodness.
Good. When just before we sat down, I said that time flies. It has flown. I knew when I spoke to you on the telephone that I was going to like you. You carry on the theme of us having amazing, lovely people on the show. You've been a star. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I wish you well with Katy Build.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steve.
And I look forward to watching your progress. Viewers, listeners, time's flown again. Another episode has come to the end. Hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed talking to Katy. Have a lovely weekend. Stay safe. Talk soon.